The food service, hospitality, and retail industries are evolving in ways you've never heard of until now. Hosted by global industry technovator Rob Grimes and powered by the IFBTA, Techbytes is your go-to podcast, putting technology innovation and trends on the menu.
Welcome back to another episode of the Techbytes podcast powered by the IFBTA. I'm Rob Grimes, your host. And this week, I'm very happy to be having a spotlight conversation with Drew Holst, who is the VP of Sales and Marketing for Powerhouse Dynamics. And this is going to be a special episode because we're going to be talking about an area that I don't think a lot of our listeners always think about. So Drew, welcome to Techbytes.
Thank you very much, Rob. Excited to be here.
Well, I think our audience is going to be very excited when they learn about some of the things that you are bringing to the table, but your interest area. But why don't we just start out with, why are you here as a conversation guest? Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and also about Powerhouse Dynamics?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Rob. So on my side of the table, like most folks, I started out in high school and in college working in restaurants, and I've always loved the hospitality industry. So it's really exciting for me to be part of the Powerhouse Dynamics team and our interaction every day with restaurant groups out there, big and small. When we think about Powerhouse Dynamics, we think about ourselves as an IoT company. So we connect equipment. So that could be HVAC equipment so that we can help reduce your utility costs through things like your, less air conditioning in the summer and more or less heat in the winter.
So you're actually giving us a little bit of a definition of the components of what I'll call, even though the company and the product's called Open Kitchen, it's Open Kitchen's the product, but, it's actually saying more than that. Let me just ask you a question there. You said that you started in the industry, working in restaurants. What did you actually start doing?
Well, I started out as a dishwasher, and I absolutely believe I was the worst dishwasher that could have ever been. I had no idea what I was doing. My cousin got me the job. But over time, I figured out how to be a waiter and eventually a bartender, and I had a ton of fun. I grew up in Rhode Island, so working at restaurants on the water and living the life that was,
in the home of
a lot
Johnson and Wales.
Home of Johnson and Wales. Yep, absolutely. Rob, it's funny you mentioned that. Actually, funny enough, my dad used to sell appliances to the Johnson and Wales campus. I never even thought about that. But
were they commercial restaurant appliances?
They were commercial restaurant appliances. I don't know how I've never connected those dots.
Well, we're connecting the dots here, which is why you're here. But the important thing is that whenever somebody gets onto this conversation and they have that operational background, as you do, it's more than just understanding, about equipment or whatever, although it sounds like you have that background too. Did your dad ever take you on the sales calls?
No, he did not.
All right. Well, then we'll leave that one behind, but let's go on to the conversation. So I'm going to guess that if you made that transition from a dishwasher to a bartender, that you're a really connected guy. Okay. So
that's great.
All right. So there we go. All right. So we have to have a little human there. So we were sort of defining what are the components of an open kitchen. And you started by talking about IoT, the Internet of Things. You did mention food safety. I think there's probably some other pieces and components, energy in there, and there's some other parts.
Yeah, for sure. So when we do think about that, right, IoT, all of these different things around a restaurant or in your kitchen that are connectable, and there's so many benefits that start to come out of that. It's the ability to start managing a portfolio from a distance and being able to leverage that technology to understand what's happening within your different restaurants all over the place. What's happening with that equipment? How's it performing? Are there opportunities here for me to start streamlining my maintenance and my facilities team to make sure that I'm focused in on those pieces of equipment that need help? When we think about food safety, it's massive in the industry.
Well, I got to say that people are probably scratching their heads right now if they're in the IT side of the business because they're saying, hey, wait a second. They understand technology in a restaurant or hospitality environment, but they're probably thinking about the point of sale. They're probably thinking about the digital signage, the back office systems. But what you're talking about is connecting everything together on the equipment side and in the kitchen. And I'm not so sure that everyone realizes that these things, in fact, can be connected in the first place. So is that like something brand new, or is that something that's been out for years, or it's really as the equipment evolves?
I think it's a combination of all of the above. So I think what's been happening probably over the last 10 years is more and more equipment has been manufactured that can be connected. But I think to your point, Rob, I think a lot of folks were looking at it and thinking, I don't know that I need to connect it, or how do I connect it, or what is that benefit going to be if I connect it? But over time, as more and more of that equipment is starting to be connectable, and now we're really seeing that trend become so much bigger here in the industry. I think more and more on the operator side, folks are starting to say, hey, there's something to this, and there's a value to me in being able to understand what's going on with that equipment. And let's start thinking about how do we connect that and leverage that data and that insight.
Well, it's funny because this conversation for me actually started out with Middleby, and Middleby is one of the largest global equipment manufacturers, both on the personal side as well as the business side. And they have, if I remember, like 140 brands or something like that are out there. But you're within that community, within the Middleby community. And I'm pretty sure that when people look at kitchen equipment, they never really thought about smart kitchen equipment. And they certainly didn't think about the word IoT in there. And I'm sure that there's something that got Middleby interested in that as an equipment manufacturer. But a couple of years ago, I went to the NAFM show, and I was meeting with James Poole, the CTO of Middleby, and we were talking about this. And I said, you have to explain this to me. How come you're like a technology company and Open Kitchen had a big display there? And I'm like, what's this about? And somebody put it in really simple terms for me. They said, if the equipment has a screen on it, it is digital. And if it's digital, it can communicate. And so I don't know if that's a proper, simple way of looking at this for the average food service operator who may not have thought about it. But that's what they told me. And I'm like, wow. So now I go to these shows and I see it all digital. And then I see this big screen that shows how everything is connected. And I think I get it. So is that a good way of considering what equipment can be part of a connected kitchen?
I think it is. I think it's a good start. Typically, that's one of the first questions that we'll ask of a customer is that piece of equipment you're talking about, does it have a screen? Because that's where we're going to start. And that means that there's some data and there's a brain to that piece of equipment that we can start to tap into. And then from there, it just evolves. And different pieces of equipment can give you different data points. You might think about something like an ice maker. And why do I need to have an ice maker connected? Well, anybody who's worked in a restaurant and gone to get ice and there's no ice knows that problem actually happened 4 days ago, but nobody knew about it. And now it's a big commotion within the restaurant because we've got to go figure out where to get ice.
Because it might take 4 days to use up the ice that's in there to figure out you have no new ice.
Exactly. Somebody's been going in there and they're like, oh, there's ice in here, but maybe there's not as much as I thought there would be, but whatever, we must be really busy. But then you look over at things like some of the ovens that are out there and fryers and the amount of data points that they can share. It's tremendous. So it's exciting as more and more of these pieces of equipment
well, let me ask you this.
Built with that in mind.
I can think back like 10 years ago, and I used to think about what the subjects were for restaurateurs and trying to get them to go ahead and invest in technology in the first place, maybe 15 years ago, was very difficult. And part of it was connectivity. And of course, as things moved over to the cloud, they had to have connectivity, which in the past they thought, oh, it's good enough to just get that from the local cable service. And, we know what that does is connectivity. But now what we're talking about is integration and connectivity. So how does it work when you have all this equipment, and how does it work in, let's call it the total tech stack or the ecosystem of a restaurant or a location? How is it actually all connected together? Because they have other systems there too.
Yeah, they do. And I think you bring up an interesting point. So restaurants were, it feels like, very hesitant to technology and especially connectivity years ago. But I think things like COVID really drove that forward. As folks got more and more used to being able to look at their POS or their scheduling system or their inventory systems on their phones and on their tablets and not being in those restaurants, the more comfortable they became with the entire idea, which has been great because it's driving the whole industry forward. I think what we hear a lot, Rob, is, hey, it's kind of like we've all cut the cord at our house. I know at my house we did, and now I can never find anything to watch on television because we're dealing with 7 or 8 different apps, trying to remember what show is on where. And that's a struggle that I think we're hearing more and more from customers.
So wait a minute. So we're not saying that all the equipment has to come from one place. And by the way, you've already brought up things like health and safety. You've brought up, I believe you brought up temperature monitoring and things like that. Those are all kinds of different pieces of equipment and monitors offered by many different people. So are you somehow pulling that all together? And by doing all these parts and pieces and bringing them together, what kind of data is somebody getting out of it?
Exactly. So that's part of the beauty of the idea of being an open platform, and the open kitchen platform is you can look at different types of equipment and different categories of equipment all through one dashboard. So now you've got one place to look for all of that. You can get alerts, you can get insights. You can also export that data. And what we see a lot of our customers do is export that data and then marry it up in a BI tool. And how does that start to compare to things like my sales, my inventory, all of this? And how do I start to see that much more into my restaurant and into my brand to be able to make those right decisions?
So what kinds of decisions are somebody, what kinds of decisions are being thrown at them that they can make without having to, move it into something else? Is there some obvious information that just comes right off the bat?
Yeah, I think there's two examples that come up with it. I think on the one that's most tangible that everybody can understand is, if we see it all the time, the kitchen team, they walk in first thing in the morning, it's 8:30 in the morning, they turn on every piece of equipment in there. They've got the fryers on, they've got pizza ovens on, everything's on. We're not serving lunch or anything for 2.5 hours, but boy, everything's on and ready to go. There's a lot of opportunity there to help reduce your utility costs just by being able to have insight and to drive operations and being able to see the data and say, hey, I know it takes a half hour for that thing to warm up. I don't need you to turn it on until 10:15. So
Well, wait a minute, but that brings up an interesting question. So if you're within the unit, that's one thing. But if you have a bunch of units, um, are you going to receive alerts that tell you perhaps that the equipment has not been turned on and therefore they're not going to open on time, or maybe somebody didn't show up? That's sort of an interesting byproduct of not turning something on. At the same time, if they have something that's running too long, it's sort of like scheduling a shift for an employee. You don't want them to go to overtime. You get that warning. So are there messages that are sent to the owner who may or may not be on site that also help them to manage remotely?
There are. So that's part of the beauty of the alerting process. We know that, when it comes to our platform, we love our dashboards and we love our data, but we know that operators don't have time to always sit there in front of a dashboard. So most of our customers really are more reliant on the alerts. So
And they
we
need the
help them.
alerts on mobile devices because they should be out in the dining room with their guests.
You're exactly right. So those alerts, they can come through, via text or email. It can come through the Open Kitchen app, and it can go to multiple folks. So Rob, you might be the person that needs to know when that walk-in cooler is getting warmer than it should, whereas I might be the person that needs to know, hey, you know what? We're not changing the fry oil frequently enough. That's something that I need to focus in on and take a look at. So it's pretty neat how you can start to take that data and share it with the right people to actually drive the operation.
With the rapid expansion of technology in the food and beverage industries, finding the right supplier can become overwhelming and complicated. To simplify this process, the IFBTA created Exchange. Exchange is a powerful search tool where users can easily narrow down their technology search and refine results by application type, geography served, department, and more. Browse resources and learn more about the industry's technology suppliers at exchange.ifbta.org. Now, back to the show.
We're going to shift our conversation to really take a look at the future and where we're investing and what can we do here. So, one of the things I was thinking about is if we know in the past that equipment and that the entire location was not connected, maybe it was connected for security cameras. I think they probably get that. Maybe it was connected for some energy management, but you did not have all of the equipment talking to each other and feeding each other. And that actually all goes in there. So, what are the new changes in the environment themselves that impact, a connected kitchen? You mentioned COVID in the first half. Are people changing the way that they do business, and therefore the connected kitchen becomes even more important?
They are. They are definitely changing the way that they do business. And I think more and more brands are starting to think about, what am I going to do about connectivity and IoT? How is that going to come into play, not only today in my restaurant, but in the future? And am I ready for that? I had an interesting conversation with National Chicken Chain, and we were working with them on connecting some of their fryers. And their VP of IT was resistant. And I was talking to him about it. And I said, what is going on? And he told me, I'm going to be honest with you. We actually have an IoT network and nobody knows about it. And I'm afraid to let you on there because I'm afraid of what's going to happen. I think there's going to be a whole bunch of things, and all of a sudden it's going to open doors to things that I wasn't ready for. And I think that's exciting. I think it's interesting to see how all of that connectivity is going to come in and continue to change and
So
help kitchens and
the
restaurants
IT
evolve.
person the one who's actually driving this, or is this the facilities manager, or is it the supply chain person? I mean, who actually has responsibility?
It's everybody. I think we spend a lot of time talking with the operations teams about, hey, how are we using and leveraging this equipment today? And what are some better ways that we can do that? And how do we take that data and start to optimize our procedures throughout the course of the day? When we talk to the facilities teams, hey, we're responsible for making sure that the 100 restaurants I've got underneath me are up and running at all times, because down equipment is no good for anybody. So the only way that I can do that is to leverage technology, and I've got to understand it. IT wants to come in and make sure that things are secure. It's no secret that there are data breaches, and those are a big concern for restaurants. So we work closely with them. We happen to be PCI level 1 certified, so just like you would have with your POS, and that usually can help make those IT teams that much more comfortable. But they're, the culinary team. When we talk to the culinary team about how is it that they're doing their job, and I'll give you one example. When they're making updates to a menu and they're putting out LTOs and they're making tweaks to recipes out there, in the old world, they were sending out USBs to the restaurants and hoping that somebody got it and somebody made their way over to the oven or to the fryer and plugged that USB in and gave it time to download the new menu, and everything worked perfectly. But through connectivity, we can send those menus through the air. So you can schedule when that's going to happen. It's a game changer for your culinary teams. We're saying, I want to bring out this new menu item. Oh boy, we need to make a change over here. Really hard for me to do it.
Well,
scale
especially when you have smart
restaurants.
equipment that actually knows, the cooking times and what you're going to do and the temperatures for the fryers and when the oil needs, if you can make a change because you're also changing your menu, I bet you half the people never think about that they have to perhaps change some of the settings on the equipment, or they need to monitor it differently to get their food standards.
You're exactly right. And if you've got a fleet of 25 restaurants, you probably don't have the same oven in all of them. So how does that cookie or that pizza or whatever
if
it
you
is
got
that you're doing,
franchisees in there, that's an extended thing because you may or may not mandate exactly. They may have choices in equipment. Are you able to actually tie together different pieces of equipment from different manufacturers?
So that's the beauty of Open Kitchen. When we started integrating with cooking equipment, you mentioned earlier that we are part of Middleby. We've been part of the Middleby family for about 5 years now, but we were integrating with cooking equipment for about 5 years prior to that. So we've been in this game for 10 years now, and we integrate with brands both inside and outside of Middleby. And it's a huge benefit to our customer base because they don't all have this exact same
And that's a
piece of equipment.
benefit to Middleby as well, because when somebody needs to replace something, they might as well be within the ecosystem. So it gives knowledge of the types of equipment and types of problems also, so they can improve their own equipment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's one of the big keys that we see, especially when folks want to test equipment. The ability for the manufacturer to have some insight and say, hey, how is my equipment performing? And I want to make sure that I'm seeing consistent results just like you are. We reserve the right to make our equipment better. That helps everybody.
So if we take a look then at some of the new things that are there, we've had on this podcast before discussions about some of the new methods of cooking, the new equipment like sous vide, and also we know that there's regulation out there about gas versus electric. And as more and more, it occurs to me as more and more equipment needs to be designed to work in a all electric environment. I just picture, EV vehicles, how much technology is in there. So I think that even if a person has not converted their equipment in the past, that as they get legislation and they have to move from gas to electric, it's automatically going to put in equipment that is able to be able to communicate with each other and be part of an integrated network.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely it is.
robotics. I don't want to forget that one either. I know Middleby is very involved in robotics, but as people start putting robotics in there, that takes even more, integration. And I'm not talking about, robots moving around the restaurant. I'm talking about helping to do fries or dishwashing. I was at the National Restaurant Show. I saw the dishwasher robotics. All those things, have to be connected, and they give out data that really is useful in planning the operation. Probably unexpected data, I would bet.
When it comes to things like robotics and automation, it's such a driver of being able to understand how is that piece of equipment working. If you've got a robot that, to your point, is out there and it's making fries, that robot may or may not understand when something's wrong with that fryer. So having that fryer connected now is able to send that signal to somebody that, hey, we need to go in tomorrow and make sure that fryer is up to snuff and get that maintained. At the same time, being connected to that robotic arm at the fryer and being able to understand what's going on here, and how is it working? Is it working as it's planned? Does that need touch up? Being able to understand that and giving these pieces of equipment a voice and an ability to tell its story is really what all that connectivity is
Oh
about.
boy. Okay. So giving a piece of equipment a voice and telling the story. So I hate the subject, but you can't avoid it, of artificial intelligence, AI. And I'm wondering what kind of actionable information, AI, um, do you get, or what plays behind the scenes here? And where is AI playing now, and where do you see it's going to play in the future as far as the data that's coming out of the connected devices and the open connected kitchen?
So AI is the buzzword. I think everybody's talking about it, and I think we're all
I
still
want to talk about
learning.
how we use the information. How do we make it actionable? So where does AI play for you guys?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a couple different components of how we use it. When I think of one, we have a piece of our energy management software called Demand Smart. What Demand Smart will actually do is it will be able to read and understand what energy is being used, say, to cool your restaurant at 5 o'clock in the afternoon when energy is at its peak cost. It is as expensive as it's going to be throughout the course of the day. And do I really need four of my rooftop units running to maintain 74 degrees in my restaurant? The software is going to read it and say, I don't think we do. I don't think we do. Let's throttle that back so that we're not using as much energy right now when it's so expensive. And in turn, now we're reducing our costs, we're reducing our wear and tear on that equipment. And that's the AI reading that. At the same time, as soon as it starts to feel a change in that temperature, it's going to click all those units back on so that we make sure that the guest and the employee experience remains consistent and
And
the same.
certainly other industries like the industry has understood that, turning off sections of a building or even in a room, or
Mhm.
lights on or off. It's just we haven't really applied that within our industry. And it is the lights, it is the energy, it is the security all tied together, but it's the equipment as well that's running the plant. And I think that's really what we're talking about here. So, are you able to share with us maybe some surprising things that some of the people you've worked with came up with that they never thought they were going to get out of the data? I mean, I guess I understand if you're going to tell me the temperature's off or a piece of equipment needs to be fixed, but is there some unintended outcomes that came out of this that just surprised you or surprised your customers?
For sure, for sure. One that comes to mind back in the end of last year, we were sitting in a business review with large chain customer of one of the Middleby brands actually, and we were looking at the ovens that they've got, and they were talking about how they're using them, and we were actually sharing a lot of the data that comes from Open Kitchen and talking about how we can help leverage that insight. And one of the things that came up was they had noticed that at one of their locations they had left an oven on for about a week straight, and there was definitely, hey, we need to get in front of this. There's a utility component to this. There's a safety component to leaving an oven on for 24 hours a day for a week. We've got to get in front of this. This is the kind of thing that we need to be tracking. We need to be looking at. And then one of the folks in the room actually raised her hand and she said, hang on, if it's been on for a week straight, who's been cleaning that oven? And everybody turned and looked, and it was a light bulb moment of, hey, we've got to be doing this as part of our best practices. And obviously there's a health and safety component to that. So these are the kind of things that start to get extrapolated out of using those pieces of equipment when they're connected, and then being able to look back and say, hey, here's an actionable item that we can leverage to go back and drive the operations of the restaurant.
Well, I think that people can get that, that idea, and they understand that for sure. I think that was a very understandable thing that comes out, and you're going to learn things as you look at these things and you start looking at the reports or you get the alerts and you'll say, hey, that's something that we should do. So if people want to understand more in general about connected kitchens and about each of these different areas, as well as, Powerhouse Dynamics and the Open Kitchen and Middleby, where do they go for resources? I mean, obviously they can go to a website. Are there some conferences and things that are pretty good for it, for them to really understand this?
There are some great conferences out there. I think, like you were talking about before, so much of this is driving forward. I know in the fall we've got conferences like FS Tech coming up. You can always come to the Powerhouse Dynamics website. We've got some great resources there. We're putting out blogs at a rate of about 2 a month with more and more insight into IoT and how do we best leverage that in different facets of operating restaurants on a day-to-day basis. And of course, the Middleby Innovation Kitchen outside of Dallas is a great opportunity to come and actually see that IoT and how does that.
And actually, the IFPTA held a meeting there because we're trying to get the food and beverage technology people together, with the equipment people.
You did in the fall, and it was from what I understand, it was fantastic. It was fantastic. Well, listen, it is a great opportunity.
So, Drew, I want to thank you for, giving a perspective and sharing some ideas, about how people can have a connected kitchen, a connected environment, and thinking about their equipment and all the different data and things that they never really thought about before. So I really appreciate your sharing those, perspectives, those perspectives with us. And certainly I encourage our listeners to go check out Powerhouse Dynamics and the Connected Kitchen, the Open Kitchen. And I'm sure that you can reach out to Drew Holst as well, who's their Vice President of Sales and Marketing. But remember, he's a restaurateur, started as a dishwasher, ended up tending bar, and never got invited to go with his dad on sales calls at Johnson & Wales. So, that's Drew, right. I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your perspective.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Rob, for having me on.
This podcast is brought to you by the International Food and Beverage Technology Association. The IFBTA is the industry's voice of technology within the food and beverage industries, providing thought leadership as your single impartial go-to resource. The IFBTA offers in-person and online communities to connect with your peers, the exchange, an all-encompassing global technology resource, and an industry-wide professional education and certification program. The bottom line is the IFBTA is your place to gather, learn, and share. So thank you for joining us on this episode of the Techbytes podcast, powered by the IFBTA. I'm Rob Grimes, your host, and I look forward to taking our next bite of technology together.